So before we start, I just want to say that on my notes, I've accidentally titled this film A Big, Bold, Beautiful War rather than A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, which, to be honest with you, I think probably encapsulates my thoughts on this film entirely. That I'm at war with myself as to whether this film I'm just indifferent towards or whether or not I think it's kind of terrible. So A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey is the third directorial feature from writer, director, and editor Kogonada. Kogonada is a South Korean American director who goes by a pseudonym and has yet to ever reveal his true identity, along with his age, I believe. He is someone that comes from the online space. He wrote video essays for a long time and in 2017 he began his directorial career with the feature Columbus, starring John Cho and Haley Lu Richardson. Then in 2022, he returned after a 5-year hiatus with the film After Yang, which was a much larger and expansive vision starring Justin H. Min, Haley Lu Richardson, Jodie Turner-Smith, and Colin Farrell. Now, across these two first features, I was a bit mixed on whether or not I thought Kogonada was a genius or whether I just thought he was someone with a unique style that fits with these sort of smaller films that is inherent in his first feature. And as he began to expand, it sort of lost its focus and its charm for me. So Columbus, I think, is a great feature that is inherently tied to the topic of making essays about it. It wants to be explored. It wants to be interpreted, even if you're not necessarily getting at the heart of what Kogonada believes the film is about. He wants to know what your thoughts are. And the sort of link between architecture and the relationships is the main crux of the film, and Haley Lu Richardson really embodies that she can use architecture as a healing process, but she can also use it as a space that holds her trapped and in stasis. And it's her decision ultimately whether or not she moves forward or moves backwards. The only issue I had with this film was that I think that the John Cho character is a bit underutilized and a bit underdeveloped. And we're sort of just meant to understand that he's in the wrong and Haley Lu Richardson's character is in the right because she is the primary protagonist and he is the secondary protagonist. And there's not enough exploration of his side of the argument, let's say, for me to really feel like he's fleshed out and is actually given a perspective on the events that are taking place. But overall, I was very touched by it. I think it's an incredibly good film. And it's one that I can return to several times, and I will probably get new things from it every time. With After Yang, it's a much more expensive and expansive vision that is built on this idea of fatherhood, particularly, and parenthood generally, and seeks to explore what necessarily is the crux of being a parent. Is it a genetic disposition? Is it a disposition to having the child be there from their very beginning? Is adoption and the relationship between a human and a robot, can that count as parenthood? And Kogonada uses the sci-fi backdrop to explore this theme, but I didn't feel as if he had a focal point as well as he did in Columbus. And I think that expanding the cast in the way that he does from Columbus, which essentially has 2, maybe 3 or 4 characters, to a film that has nearly 10, I would say, doesn't work out very well for the film. And I wanted more of this sort of dialed down approach that is there in Columbus. You suck! When your budget goes up and your actors become bigger, that's very unlikely to happen, and that's not what has happened with A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey. This is by far Kogonada's biggest film ever. This film has as its leads Margot Robbie and Colin Farrell, two stars slash superstars. We'll get into that a bit. And had a budget of, I believe it's around 45 million, which once you actually get into what this film is about and the themes it's approaching and whether or not this is even marketable, I find that budget to kind of be ridiculous that money was ever allocated for this film. And once again, I think the expansion of Kogonada's directing efforts works against him. I think he inherently has a vision and a style that works with smaller features because he has so much to say with his cinematography. And yet with each outing, he says less with it because he has more that he needs to do. He has more that he needs to show you. Oh, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. And because of that, the editing suffers and the cinematography suffers. And there's not very much going on here that is cinematically very interesting. He doesn't hold the camera in the same way as he does in the first two features, especially Columbus. And it also loses a lot of its vibrancy and intensity that is there, particularly again in Columbus. After Yang is sort of grayed out, and that again is because it's a sci-fi feature, but Columbus is full of color. There's reds, yellows, blues, greens. It's all over. And he makes sure that in every shot there is a color to catch your eye, but it's not distracting. And yet it's distracting in this film how little of that there is. And even in After Yang, with everything being grayed out, that's deliberate. And even though I'm not personally a fan of it, I can understand the decision because it sort of puts across your theme that this world is kind of hollowed out. It doesn't seem impossible for you to become connected with something that is genetically not real, something that is all wiring, because look at the world around you, it's kind of hollowed out and not real anyways. So why would you not be able to approach it, that relationship? In this film, there's none of that. There's no color, or there is a lot of color, but yet it's not honed in on, it's not focused on. There isn't a deliberateness about the color. There isn't a deliberateness about the cinematography, and there isn't a deliberateness about the editing. And the editing in particular feels like something that is becoming more and more of a problem in the digital age, which is that it's so snappy, it's so intense with the cuts that I, a lot of the time, was feeling kind of nauseous, actually, and was kind of like, can we just kind of tone this down? And this directing style doesn't allow the actors, principally Farrell and Robbie, much time to actually act. There isn't really much of a script there to allow them to express themselves. And now I don't believe Colin Farrell is particularly a great emotional actor. And when he is acting emotional, it's fairly muted, I would say. It kind of lacks a moment of climax where both of the characters are finally coming to terms with what it is that they're dealing with. Then, as a result, kind of exploding emotionally. That doesn't really happen. It happens more so, I would say, with Robbie than it does with Farrell. And I think she's all right in that moment. But because it's not mirrored into Farrell's performance, I find that a bit disappointing. Across the film, they're kind of both all right. I just don't really like this version of Colin Farrell. I prefer his over-the-top sort of delivery in something like The Penguin or even Daredevil, to be honest. I prefer when he's allowed to go balls to the wall, essentially. And in this film, Kogonada, it feels deliberately makes him more muted, and it doesn't work to the benefit of the film. I also just sort of question, again, giving 45 million as a budget, which in this economy is a big budget, and then getting two actors that I think we should probably have a conversation about as to whether or not they're actually superstars. I just don't think they are. And I don't think that they're very good at selling an audience on, like, you have to go and see this. And don't get me wrong, there's not very many of them at all right now. But as other people have already pointed out, Margot Robbie is not this bona fide superstar who will sell a movie for you. At least as not as well as Hollywood would like you to believe. I'm fine with their performances, but they're not as deep as I would expect a Kogonada film to have. I always return to Haley Lou Richardson in his debut, which is so poignant and she holds so much emotion in her face. And yes, she's quiet, and yes, she's fairly muted, but she's able to convey that she's dealing with a lot and that she feels somewhat stuck and unable to move on, but yet she doesn't want to move on, but yet she does. And there's none of that in either of these performances, I don't feel like. And again, I don't know if the script allows them to do that. This was a script that was apparently very hot and very sought after by multiple studios. And I don't really know why, because there's not very much here. And what is here feels fairly cliched. A lot of the metaphors feel very on the nose and pointed. And yet I don't ever feel like those metaphors are fully explored, let's say. You know, early on in the film, there is a moment where one of the characters says doors are difficult to walk through, which obviously is a thing about opportunities, and when life gives you a door, you've just got to try your best to walk through it. The film is kind of literally about walking through doors all the time, but yet it just feels like such a hollow metaphor compared to architecture being used as the place that can hold you in stasis, and it can also heal you, and it can be a driving force for growth, and essentially this idea that anything that you look at can be a form of art if you let it. And yet in this film, the metaphor around doors is incredibly hollow. It just sort of is there to move the plot along, and I don't really feel like there's any actual depth to that metaphor. And this happens a couple times with the dialogue where I just feel like it's fairly cliched and boring, and I've seen it before. And I'm fine with the dialogue being cliched if the director is able to cinematically back it up with an exploration of that metaphor. I also think one of the things that is pretty present, and I think it's quite confusing to me, is that the women in this film feel pretty underwritten. Farrell and his father have their own relationship, I would say, separate from a relationship, whereas Margot Robbie and the character of her mother, their entire relationship hinges on relationships. At its best,
this film,
bang average. It looks fine, the performances are fine, the directing is fine, and if we're being generous to it, it can kind of skate on that level of just like, this is watchable, but like, I'm not loving it, I'm not hating it, whatever. But everything it's exploring has in the past 5 years been explored in other movies that are better. The two that came to mind as I was watching it, All of Us Strangers with Paul Mescal and Andrew Scott. Even more present was The Worst Person in the World by Joachim Trier. This is one of my favourite films, so obviously I'm going to be biased towards it. But everything the film wants to say about accepting that you are capable of making bad decisions, but those bad decisions don't define you, is more eloquently and elegantly explored in The Worst Person in the World than it is in this. Ultimately, if I was going to leave this film anywhere, it would be to say that I think it's fine. I don't think it's terrible, but there are better films out there that center on the topic that this film is driving at, and it just feels like an attempt to recreate that, but in a more expansive vision, and that vision doesn't really work for the sake of what is a very talented director in Kogonada, I do believe. I hope that he isn't able to get another movie financed to the level of this, and that instead he returns to that low budget, naturalistic, realistic feel of a Columbus, or even something closer to an After Yang, because that is where his strengths lie. I don't think he's capable of making a film on this level, and it's detrimental to his growth as a director and a writer to keep taking projects of this size. getting bigger and bigger is not always necessarily getting better and better. It is pronounced that it's inspired by those films, and the script and the directing and the acting, none of it is good enough to really go, okay, yes, you're inspired by those films, but I'm able to differentiate you from them.